Welcome to my presentation on the hybrid treatment approach in speech-language pathology. In this presentation, I will discuss the hybrid treatment approach and how it relates to the treatment session that I observed on Master Clinician. I completed this observation on Master Clinician. The treatment session type was child, speech, and language. The goals of this session were articulation, receptive language, expressive language, and past tense verbs. The structure was relaxed. First, the clinician and the child had a conversation. Then, the clinician created a list of activities. Next, the clinician and the client did the speech activities. The materials and activities used were pretend food to teach the client the difference between the words ate and eat, which ate is a past tense verb of eat. They use magnetic fashion dolls to describe the different clothes and to have some open dialogue. The child used a fluency pacing strip because she talked very fast and you could hardly understand her, so it was the fluency pacing strip was used to get her to slow down. And they did a comparative and superlative adjective activity. An example of comparative superlative adjectives are big, bigger, and biggest. And in this activity, they use different size toys. For example, they use a small wagon, a medium wagon, and a big wagon. And they also used a small car, a big car, in a medium car. The child had to pick up a small car and she had to figure out which wagon to put the toy car in. So she put the smallest car into the smallest wagon. She put the medium car into the she put the medium car in the bigger wagon, and then she put the biggest car into the biggest wagon. The clinician gave the child verbal praise after each correct response. The cues used were verbal, tactile, and visual. I don't think that these cues were effective because the child was strong-willed and oftentimes she would not listen to the clinician, or she thought that the clinician wasn't right, and so she would challenge her a lot. So she wouldn't even listen to the verbal cues or look at the verbal cues. She would just, do her own thing. The changes that I think that I would make to the session would be to create a token economy for the child because she was not responding to the verbal reprimands given by her clinician. So I believe that a bit of tangible reinforcement would make the treatment session go better and that the child would listen more. Also, I think that the activities that were the most effective were the pretend food and the comparative and superlative adjective activities. I think the pretend food was the most effective because by the end of the activity, the child was using eat and ate correctly. And I also think the comparative superlative task was effective because by the end of that activity, the child understood big, bigger, and biggest, and she was able to put the toy cars in the correct wagons. I think that the least effective activity were the magnetic fashion dolls. By that time, the child got very frustrated and defiant, and she wouldn't listen to the clinician. She wanted to do things her own way, so I don't think that that activity was very effective. What is the hybrid treatment approach? In this approach, the clinician develops activities that are very natural, but at the same time allows opportunities for the child's spontaneous use of utterances containing the targeted language forms. Basically, This is a naturalistic treatment session that encourages the child to spontaneously use utterances. An example of the hybrid treatment approach is vertical structuring and expansion. This type of hybrid treatment approach is where the therapist presents the child with a stimulus, asks the child to respond, and then the clinician expands on this response. Vertical structuring and expansion was an example of a treatment approach that was used in my treatment session. So in the treatment session, the clinician asked the child, "You guys ate chips?" And then that's the stimulus, the question, "You guys ate chips?" The child responded, "No, I'm not 8." And that's the response. And so the clinician expanded on the child's response by teaching her the difference between the number 8 and the past tense verb ate. This is where they use the pretend food activity. The clinician, the child, both took turns holding up a piece of a fake food, and they would say, "I ate this," and that's when the child learned the difference between the number 8 and the past tense verb ate. The article I chose was called "Building Vocabulary Knowledge and Phonological Awareness Skills in Children with Specific Language Impairment Through Hybrid Language Intervention, a Feasibility Study." I chose this article because it gave empirical evidence that the hybrid treatment approach is effective, and also because the children in this study had expressive and receptive language impairments. So the research question for this article was, what are the treatment effects of a hybrid language intervention targeting vocabulary knowledge and phonological awareness for children with specific language impairments who are functioning within the emergent literacy period? Basically, what this question is asking is, what are the effects of this treatment approach on children with a specific language impairment? There were 17 participants. All were children, young children, preschool and early elementary school children. All of them had specific language impairments. The client in the treatment video and the participants in this study are similar because both have expressive and receptive language impairments. So the methods for this study, the participants' language and phonological skills were measured by clinical and experimental assessments. The clinical assessments measured listening comprehension by the token test for children. They measured expressive vocabulary by the 100 picture naming test. Oral narrative production was measured by the bus story. Phonological awareness was measured by the preschool and primary inventory of phonological awareness. And drawing skills was measured by the developmental test of visual motor integration. Experimental assessments were measured by experimental tasks. The first experimental task was word attribute identification task, and the second experimental task was word association task. So the participants received 6 one-hour speech and language sessions for 6 weeks. Each session included a scripted oral narrative and a card and board game. The participants' parents were also given a packet to take home to work on these skills. The results of the study showed significant improvement in phonological awareness, spoken language, and oral narratives. The limitations of this study was because the population only included children with specific language impairments. I think that more information could have been given to see if hybrid treatment is effective if they included children with language disorders due to syndromes and also children with language disorders due to craniofacial anomalies. This is a table of the clinical assessment results that was obtained in the study. So these are the measures. This is the pre-mean, the pre-standard deviation, the post-mean, and the post-standard deviation. And we're just going to focus on the ones that I highlighted for time. So these are the results of the t-test, and these results showed a significant improvement in phonological awareness pre and post intervention. And this is the E2 statistics, and it indicated that there was a large effect size for changes in performance pre and post intervention, which is good. So for rhyme awareness, the pre-mean was 5.0 and the pre-standard deviation was 2.0. The post-mean is 7.8 and the post-standard deviation is 2.8, and you can see that between the pre-mean and the post-mean, that's a good amount of improvement in the pre-standard deviation and the post-standard deviation. That's a good amount improved. Alliteration awareness, pre-mean was 5.8. The pre-standard deviation was 2.0. The post-mean was 8.1, and the post-standard deviation is 1.3. And for alliteration awareness, this was one of the biggest jumps. So this one showed a good amount. This one had significant improvement. Oral narrative for information, pre-mean was 16.7, pre-standard deviation 7.4, post-mean 21.0, and post-standard deviation 8.8. And lastly, oral narrative, the sentence length, pre-mean 7.3, pre-standard deviation 2.0, post-mean 8.2, and the post-standard deviation is 1.7. This is the table for the experimental assessment results, and it shows the mean correct performance on semantic and phonological awareness questions for trained and untrained items on the word attribute task at pre and post intervention. And we're just going to focus on these because in my treatment video, the client, she was focusing on phonological awareness, and I just wanted to highlight how the hybrid treatment approach helped improve phonological awareness. And so for phonological awareness attributes, the trained ones, the pre-mean was 40 and the standard deviation was 24.7, post-mean 73, standard deviation 33.1. The phonological attributes for the untrained items, pre-mean was 51, standard deviation 32.0. The post-mean was 78, and the standard deviation was 25.5.